I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Rainy Mountain Royalty Corp., RMO on the TSX Venture Exchange. Rainy Mountain's Brunswick property is located in the Rideout Shear Zone in Ontario. With grab samples running as high as 32 grams per ton gold, a drill program will commence this spring to test the numerous targets located by recent groundwork. For more information, visit our website, rmroyalty.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is real estate consultant Ross Kay from thewealthyhomeowner.ca. Welcome back to the show, Ross.
Thanks a lot for having me back on again, Jim.
Well, obviously, housing bubbles are a problem in Canada because finally Toronto woke up and had one. I saw Ottawa never paid any attention to Vancouver's housing bubble, but now that you have Ottawa and Ontario concerned about it, I guess it is an issue. They issued, a 16-point plan to tackle high prices in Ontario. What are the highlights?
Yeah, so certainly they wanted to address the situation that's happening here in Ontario, which, to be quite honest with you, is simply just the BC situation revisited. What we have here in Ontario right now is that we're at the part of the trading cycle where your house price gains is happening at such a unimaginable amount in terms of a yearly gain. But that's a consequence of the shift in the sales mix. So as you work through a trading cycle, there is an ongoing shift in the sales mix. And that's what takes place. That takes place whether it's in BC, it's in Toronto, it's in Burnaby, it's in Burlington, it's in New York City, it's in Dallas, Texas. These sort of things take place all the time. It's just that the study of that has never taken place. So again, this is where when you study real estate, these things come to fact. So they brought these supposedly 16 housing points that they brought up, some which will be reflected in legislation, and then others will be studied by people who don't understand housing markets. So what they're going to study, I have no idea, because they're making some statements on my firm are just outrageous in the press interviews that were done last week. What they're doing is they're adding a foreign buyer tax, similar to what BC put in. What's different though in Ontario this time is we held off releasing our bubble index for any public discourse until the government here brought this down. The Wynne government has been terrible for homeowners, and even though the Ontario Liberals have been elected several times in a row in face of ongoing problems similar to what you guys have watched out your way, they have really neglected homeowners. And I'm not going to take the time to go through in the dozens of ways or even hundreds of ways that they've done this, but it's been an ongoing situation. So they brought out policies here with this foreign buyer tax, and instead of them coming up with a made in Ontario solution, they basically looked at what the BC government did, and they applied the same policy here. They gave the same rights as Vancouver was given to the ability of the mayor of Toronto and this council to decide if they wanted to tax a vacant home, all those sort of things. They also came to the conclusion that they need to loosen building regulations. In Ontario here, we have what's called the Ontario Municipal Board, and that's where if a builder has a problem with a planning decision that the local government has made, they can go to the Ontario Municipal Board and fight that decision. It's a costly and expensive process that also happens to take the development choices out of the hands of the voters, because often the municipal board will render a decision that is counter to what the politicians had wanted. Now, remember, we have a vote, so we can get rid of the politicians. So if we don't like their policies, we can throw them out. An unelected board who can make a decision can impact your community for the next century. So that's where your concern is there. So they're going to make some changes to that process, how it's done. They did the foreign buyer tax, vacant land tax. They're going to study foreign buyer counts. So this is the crazy comment, the same way that you had in BC. Everybody keeps claiming the data doesn't exist. And my answer is a very simple one. If the data doesn't exist, how come we have it? I mean, that's really what this comes down to. There's two choices here. Either I'm lying, or the data exists and they're not aware of it. Now, what I'll tell you is that the data exists, but you have to be able to perform a calculation to get out the accurate metric that you're trying to calculate. We use government sources for many of our calculations. But the difference between my firm and the government itself, or economists or any other analyst out there, is we know how to read the government's data based on how it's collected and how you can intermingle different data sets to come out with the number that you're looking for. So when we say we know what the foreign buyer count was going to be in British Columbia, and then when those foreign buyer counts came out each month, and they were plus or minus 5% of what the number we came right out and stated the month before to be the number that they were going to report, again, we're the only people that apparently know how to calculate that number. And they believe the data doesn't exist. So you can either call us liars, the people who are paying us are liars, are fools, or it's simple the fact that everyone else is ignorant to the amount of data that's already out there.
Well, when it comes to government, we know what the answer is.
Well, the problem with that, Jim, though, is that the same
they make the
thing
big
that
decisions.
you have in British Columbia is going on right here in Ontario. So you have the Christy Clark government, who we know got lots of fundraising and that from the developer community, the realtor lobbying groups. You know, in your area, up until this tragedy happened with your housing market, BC was a self-regulated real estate industry. The BC Real Estate Trading Act was oversight was from the real estate industry itself. Now Ontario still has self-regulation. So because the government employees, staff, politicians don't understand the history behind that legislation and what the consequences of it are, they don't understand how it's negatively impacting their provinces. This is why these comments about foreign buyers, even the real estate associations themselves are ignorant to the fact when they claimed it's only 5% foreign buyers, that means their members, the real estate agents, had to send out hundreds or thousands of FINTRAC forms to the government, which have never been filed. In BC, you'll notice FINTRAC admitted they were interviewing brokers, and they interviewed, there were literally hundreds of problems that were there. That means brokers in British Columbia are going to be facing millions in dollars in fines, maybe even some criminal charges by the time FINTRAC is done cleaning up your business out there, which is probably going to take them another year and a half to get through. Ontario is going to be the same thing that's going to happen. So that's the ignorance that exists in this single largest asset class in Canada, the residential home ownership market and the home equity class. What the Ontario government did do, though, is they brought in, there was a CBC Marketplace show that was done on Ontario Realtors here earlier this spring, where 12 out of 12 realtors investigated were blatantly breaking the Real Estate and Business Brokers Trading Act here in Ontario. Now, no prosecution, no follow-up, no investigation has taken place from the self-regulating body out here on that account. But clearly it caught the eye of the government, and hopefully my letters to the Ontario Ombudsman and to the OSC that I believe they should be overseeing that, and that I was looking for help. Why are you guys not forcing the Ontario Real Estate Council to enact their own laws? It appeared maybe something was being listened to, because they came out with policy number 13. And policy number 13 is transformational in nature. And if you look at every single newspaper in Canada today, try to find one reference to number 13, you're not going to see it anywhere, because no one understands what number 13 really means.
Now, what does number 13 mean?
That was that agents, one real estate professional who is dealing with both the buyer and the seller, probably is not a good idea. And certainly the consumers are not educated enough to understand what the risk they're putting themselves to in that situation. Now, this is an old topic, Jim. This goes back to 1995 when we're bringing buyer representation to the Canadian marketplace. The reason that we were doing it, now what I'm saying by we is I was a licensed to trade professional then with Korea, sales rep with Korea. Back then, there were lawsuits being established down in California, where the threat was the government was going to end dual agency, and when the buyer and the seller could be represented by the same firm. That is such a great fear to the franchise companies like Royal LePage, Remax, Century 21, Caldwell Banker, and on and on and on. To those franchise companies, they aren't real estate companies, remember. They are simply real estate brand franchising companies. They're not brokerages. They're not registrants. They have no experience in real estate. Their experience is simply to sell real estate franchises. In other words, when Phil Soper talks about real estate as if he's an authority on it, he knows nothing what he's talking about. I could factually sit in the room and destroy every single talking point that he has. But anyways, those franchise systems are predicated on dual agency. If there is no dual agency, or there's a crack in the public's awareness that they should never, ever participate in dual agency, or the public gets educated what dual agency actually is, because there is not a provincial regulator anywhere in Canada today or the United States that actually tells the public what dual agency fully is. But number 13 said they're going to educate the public about dual agency. Now, what they didn't say, Jim, is they made a mistake. So this is how ignorant the government, the legal staff that they have, all of these hundreds and thousands of people that are working there about real estate. They used the term where a real estate professional works for both the buyer and the seller. Now, number one, in Ontario, the place where the government of Ontario operates and sets the legislation, dual agency has nothing to do with the professional. Dual agency has to do with the brokerage that where your property is listed with or where your buyer-broker contract is signed. And what that means is, if there's 500 agents in the office, we have some offices in Ontario that have over 5,000 real estate agents working at them. That broker, any single seller working with any sales rep in that entire brokerage, and a buyer working with any other real estate sales rep working with that brokerage, the second that buyer wants to buy that seller's home, and both the seller and the buyer are represented by someone working at the brokerage, that's dual agency. The government didn't say that in the legislation because the Ontario Real Estate Association, the government admitted, was involved in ongoing discussions on this topic. and the Ontario Real Estate Association would be unable to survive without RE/MAX and Royal LePage and Century 21. But those franchising systems rely upon dual agency to survive. It's so bad, Jim. Like, the public has no idea. When you're working at if you're a sales rep and you want to work at a RE/MAX office, at a broker who's licensed the RE/MAX trademark, part of the contract that you sign to work there states that your inventory, any house you list, even if it's not MLS, even if it's an exclusive listing, all of those properties are available to any other agent in the brokerage. That renders that brokerage unable to do full single agency. There is always the risk of dual agency. The fear of the real estate community since 1995 has been that the public would become aware of why you should never deal with the same brokerage in a real estate transaction. That's what the fear of the entire industry is built on. But what the Ontario government did for the first time in North American history with real estate legislation, they specifically mentioned educating the public on dual agency.
And as you've said, it's impossible for an agent to represent both the buyer and seller. Who do they really represent? Do they represent the person trying to buy the real estate or the person trying to sell it? Because obviously if you're selling it, you want the highest price. If you're buying, you want the lowest.
Correct. And what the real estate industry has been worried about since 1995 is that the public would find out, oh, wait a second, you never fully explained that to us. You might have said a few talking points, but it was always, hush, hush, but don't worry about it, just sign here. Don't worry about it, just sign here. Oh, well, don't worry, I'm protecting you. I'm not really doing that. Oh, don't worry about it. It's another agent in my office. Even though it's dual agency, it doesn't matter. They've broken all of these ethics standards and legal laws for decades now that they're worried about the class action lawsuits that would be pending. Any real estate, any lawyer in Canada who wants to set off on a class action lawsuit against Royal LePage or RE/MAX can call me, and I can give them the simple methodology that they can have a guaranteed winning class action lawsuit for all their clients. The only problem is RE/MAX and Royal LePage don't make enough money at the corporate level, and they'll simply go bankrupt. So, but maybe you have a small class action. That way you're guaranteed of getting your money. But this dual agency situation is, there are across Canada, now this is a literal comment, Jim, I'm not joking, a handful of real estate brokerages who actually operate exclusive buyer brokerage offices. What that means is they have made a business decision to only and forever only represent buyers. If one of their former clients wants to list their home with them for sale, and that foreign client wants that exclusive buyer brokerage to represent the seller in the sale of their home, the buyer brokerage will say, I'm sorry, I can't accept your $25,000 to $30,000 commission check because I am an exclusive buyer broker.
Is there one in BC?
Pardon me?
Is there one in BC?
There is a fellow who claims to be a exclusive buyer broker in British Columbia, but I had one of my staff members do a test call on the broker with a typical test question that we follow so we know whether or not what we're being told is true, and he failed. He answered the question, he took the bait, so I cannot, even though he claims to be that, in fact, he's a liar. It is not true because he fell for the bait. There is a fantastic option that is available in Ontario that we do not have available in BC right now, where people pay nothing to list their home. So in Ontario, because of the relationships we have with other brokerages, in other words, past relationships, those brokerages, in order simply to get our intelligence, have agreed that if we have clients who want to follow our strategies, they will follow our strategies to the letter of our instructions, and they will not deviate from it because we are involved in the process. In Ontario, it only costs you $1 to list your house for sale. So if you're a seller of your home, you want to sell it, you only pay $1 to sell it. You get full market value. There's no discount. There's nothing hidden here. You only have to pay $1 to sell it. That's what's headed for Ontario. And sooner than later, we will have arrangements out in British Columbia that's going to make the same possibility available out there. But what it does entail is we have to know that we have exclusive buyer brokers. Number 13 in the Ontario Housing Policy Framework that was released cited for the first time in North American history educating the public away from dual agency. And they have brought up the old discussion signaling they want to end dual agency, but the only reason they've signaled that is because they don't understand it's impossible for RE/MAX and Royal LePage to operate single agency offices. It is a legal impossibility for that to happen. So we know that over the 2 or 3 or 5 or 7 or 10 years towards the path of ending that, it's impossible in the end. But what is possible now, because this is going to take place, and the consumer is going to say, what are you talking about? So we've got out in BC, the same thing happened to him. Did you ever hear about bidding wars in houses?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Did you ever hear bidding wars of maybe a dozen people fighting for the same house?
Absolutely.
What's the biggest number you think you would have heard out there?
I don't know, 25, 30?
20, okay, so you hear the same stories here in Ontario. 25 people put a bid in on a house. What the entire real estate industry would never want you to know, and which most new people that are running these organizations don't know themselves, and what the politicians and the economists and the housing analysts don't know, is that dual agency also works for 2 buyers. So if you have 2 buyers working with the same brokerage who want to buy the same house, in other words, those 2 buyers are now competing with one another, because it's the brokerage who has the contract, those 2 buyers and the brokerage is now in what's called undisclosed dual agency, because brokers don't talk about what happens with buyers, even though from a legal standpoint, it is exactly the same. From agency law, it is exactly the same. Then, what about the person who has their house for sale? It's in a new subdivision where the houses are on one street, could be virtually identical. And then the exact same house is listed across the street by the same brokerage. But now the market's slower, like it is in Vancouver for single detached homes especially. And a buyer comes in, and the buyer is working with the same brokerage again. Wait a second. That buyer is going to choose one of those 2 houses. Which of those 2 houses is the listing broker now going to push towards the buyer? Now you've got double seller dual agency. So unless you have the 20, 25 years of experience that I have, when we brought buyer agency into Canada, and I participated in the process, and in Ontario, I was the very first real estate agent ever to get a buyer's contract signed, you would have no idea what I'm talking about. You've been in la land for the last 20 years. Number 13 changed all that.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after the break.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the pink symbol ABN-AF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Ross Kay. Ross, what overall effect do you think Kathleen Wynne's new real estate laws in Ontario have on Ontario and the rest of the nation?
Well, this is what's different in Ontario versus BC. The bubble index, which is what measures where the housing market is at any moment in time. It's a metric that we've come up with so the public can understand. You don't have to sit down and take a course how to understand this metric, which many of our metrics you would have to do. Actually, you would probably have to study for a couple of years before you could really understand what they do. The bubble metric is really quite simple because in January of 2016, that was the month where the BC bubble metric hit its record level. That is the month where your sales mix was so skewed towards a higher quality of property that the illusion of house price gains, because the real estate boards use benchmark price in British Columbia, average selling price everywhere else in Canada, but both metrics are a result of buyers, not a result of the houses. Those are so skewed that it reaches a high point. Normally the bubble deflates because they don't go high enough. But what happened in BC in January of 2016, it reached 711. Our bubble index reached a measurement of 711, which means that it was 711% skewing prices upward versus what how the housing mix historically is run. I want to apologize to any of your listeners out there. These questions that Jim is asking me are live. He may send me at times questions that a follower or listener may have, and I may address that here in the show, but I do not have anything that I'm reading from. So I apologize that if I want to be sure that people can tell I'm honest in how I'm talking versus having talking points that I want to hit upon is not taking place. So when you're listening to me, and if I make a grammatical error, if I stumble, if I make a comment on a point that I may come back and contradict or correct later, it's simply because I'm saying these things from memory off the top of my mind as the questions are thrown at me here. What we're talking about with the bubble index is the only true metric ever created that shows you how house price illusion allows Canadian home buyers to get conned by organized real estate. That metric in Ontario has not changed. What I mean by that is, in July, after they brought the policy in British Columbia on foreign buyer tax, the metric, the bubble index, had been falling from January till July. The bubble index only falls when your market is correcting. Okay? So that is the proof that everyone wonders about. Everybody's guessing. 2 or 3 years later, we'll be able to look back at the data. No. The bubble metric is a month-to-month measure. It never changes. It's always right. It's 100%. It's one of the truest metrics ever created. In Ontario, that bubble metric in March was still going up.
Ross, is Christy Clark lying when she said her foreign buyer tax is responsible for prices coming down in Greater Vancouver?
100% lie. So let me be clear. So someone can sue me if they so choose. It is a 100% lie. The data, not the stats, not the benchmark stat, not the real estate board stats, the data shows the market was correcting from January forward.
Are foreign investors the root cause of the Toronto real estate bubble?
No. Organized real estate. The people who now are saying, oh, yes, we really care about the consumer. Housing prices are crazy. After they've made millions and billions of dollars conning them over the last 3 years. After the fact, when the market is getting to such it's crazy gains being announced, they know that they're caught. Now they're starting to feign otherwise.
So who caused the Toronto bubble?
What causes any housing bubble, maybe we've never discussed this on the show before, I don't know. What causes a housing bubble is house price illusion. Okay? Because everybody believes the benchmark price in British Columbia. Because everybody believes the average selling price in Ontario. Because everybody believes the average selling price in Canada. Or they believe the Terranut National Bank House Price Index. Since all of those metrics over time, all of those metrics within 8 months realign with average selling price, which is what the data shows. It has never changed. It is 100% accurate. Every single month, there is no discussion about this. Sue me. Go ahead.
Are foreign investors now buying in Montreal?
No. Foreign investors have always bought a little tiny market share. The Quebec housing market is the fundamentally most sound housing market in Canada. There is a large enough housing stock that the population is housed properly. There is a low enough home ownership rate that housing price gains are basically below inflation, well, below house price inflation, the metric that we use. No, it is false. There is no illusion of house price gain in Quebec because of foreign buyers. Now, in BC, yes, you had the illusion of house price gain because of foreign buyers. In Ontario, there is a modest amount, but because the Ontario market is so large and because the peripheral markets around Toronto are so numerous with such a high population base, the foreign buyer impact on the average selling price is nil.
We'll have more with Ross Kay right after this.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're chatting with Ross Kay. Ross, are foreign investors selling in Vancouver and buying Calgary?
Yeah, I love that one. You know what? That's another one the Calgary Real Estate Board wants everybody to believe. So that would be BS. That would be more realtor speak. Hashtag realtor speak, like we use for Donald Trump. When he makes a comment, we know he's speaking as if he's a realtor. It's just false. There is no vacancy rate increase in Calgary tied to the sale of the type of homes that foreign buyers buy. Look, will a foreign buyer buy a house in I don't know, someplace way up northern BC where that it's a hunting lodge or something? Sure. You're always going to get a few foreign buyers buying property around the world. That's the nature of it. Is it impacting anything? No.
What happens to people with mortgages that didn't pass the stress test if Home Capital Group goes out of business?
Well, there's the unintended consequences and the unintended or the non-talked about issue of these new housing market rules. I know on this show here earlier months ago we talked about this March deadline that was coming up, where all of a sudden the banks were going to have more control over their existing mortgage holders at the time of renewal. That's exactly the situation here with Home Capital Group. If you have any of your listeners, because they do have market share in British Columbia, or if anyone's listening to this show in Ontario or Alberta, if you hold your mortgage with Home Capital Group and you used any type of fudged numbers at all, in other words, if some staff member or a mortgage broker or Home Capital Group representative gave you any assistance in securing a loan that wasn't directly by the book, you need to get your property for sale today. The reason why you need to sell it is that you will not be able to secure that mortgage when it expires. So as the term expires and it's time to up it again, you will not be able to go to another bank and get that mortgage up unless your circumstances have all changed and now the falsehoods that the original mortgage was made with are no longer falsehoods. Your economic situation has changed. But that's what's ahead for you. But it's not only Home Capital Group clients that are this way. There's the Equitable Bank. There is any second-tier lender, third-tier lenders. And even if your mortgage is with an existing bank and your loan-to-equity ratio, not loan-to-value, loan-to-equity ratio is dropping below the bank's threshold, which is a calculation that they don't really do, but it's the one that ordinary homeowners should be using to know what their risk is. You will not be able to get your mortgage renewed at the bank, or if the bank renews your mortgage, they're simply going to use that leverage to make you pay a higher interest rate. That's where Home Capital Group is going to be using their force. They've loaned out money at higher interest rates in the first place because the risk of that client was higher. But when that client comes up for renewal now, they will not be able to transition their mortgage to a traditional bank. They're going to be left with either walking away from the property because they won't be able to fulfill Home Capital Group's refinancing requirements, or they're going to accept an even higher interest rate price to pay for Home Capital Group to give them the right to renew.
Are Canadian banks bundling uninsured mortgages, and isn't that what happened in the States before their real estate bubble burst? There certainly, there was just I think it was BMO that just did a mortgage bundle. Yeah, the banks are going to do that. But there's a difference between Canada and the United States, as I've said in your show a million times. The banks, CMHC, they have no risk here. They have zero risk. All the risk is shouldered by the homeowners. 100% of the risk and the loss, if any happens, will go to the homeowner. Canada is a totally different market. We do not have the 30-year term mortgages that they have in the United States. We do have certain mortgage lending rules that even for places like Home Capital Group, i.e., you have a 10-year mortgage. Well, the bank can't charge you 10, and you want to get rid of the mortgage earlier. The bank can't charge you 10 years penalty. They can only do the 5-year penalty. Also, a 10-year mortgage in Canada becomes fully open after the 5th year. So those options are always available to Canadian homeowners. Right now, because they're paying down their principal at such a high rate, the banks have zero risk. The only place where the banks are going to get caught, and it's going to have nothing to do with these bundled mortgage products, unless the people who have purchased the bundled mortgages have relied on the loan-to-value disclosures the banks are giving to their shareholders in their quarterly bank statements. Because those loan-to-value ratios are all false. They're all false. They use the Terranet National Bank forward sortation area component. It is in aggregate, that's what forms the Terranet National Bank HPI, which
which over time simply repeats the average selling price. So because of that structure and methodology, that means those LTVs are all wrong. They're telling the investor who's buying these bundled mortgages that the combined loan-to-value ratio is only 66%, so you've got nothing to risk because the people have 34% equity. False. Those loan-to-value ratios are wrong. As you're going to be finding out in British Columbia, listeners of this show, over the next 3 months, the Teranet National Bank, HPI, will plummet. Remember, they said it was over 12% for the month of March. It's the benchmark prices in aggregate are going to plummet. Remember, they told you they were over 12% in the month of March. Over the next 3 months, they are going to plummet.
Ross, on that note, I'd like to thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks a lot, Jim. I really appreciate you having me on.
My guest has been real estate consultant Ross Kay from the wealthyhomeowner.ca. You're listening to HoweStreet.com Radio. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Questions for the show and our guests can be sent to info@HoweStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HoweStreet.com Radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HoweStreet.com Radio is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.